Jack Kingston and Frank Wolf and I, as long-standing members of the Appropriations Committee, know that this is a problem. This abuse of earmarks has created clearly the need for sweeping reforms of this process. But I think that we need to do it the right way instead of the wrong way. One of the things I like about John McCain is that he doesn't pander to people based on whatever might be popular for the moment. The right approach to this particular problem with congressional earmarking in 2008 is to step back and establish a bipartisan, bicameral select committee to overhaul the process in its entirety. And I say that because any kind of a ban that is temporary or only for an individual is not lasting. So if you pledge to say no earmarks, well, for how long and who all is affected, and how about the Senate, how about the House, how about the executive branch, how about everybody else? Because unless it is a systemic change, it's not a permanent change. It's not a real change. It is a political posture. And therefore, we should be careful not to pander on this issue, but truly seek change. I think that's what this does. This select committee, what is a select committee? Well, the Congress has this provision so that that committee can rise above the other committees. It has subpoena power. It has tremendous authority. It is unusual, but it is a committee set up to reform a system like this. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution clearly says that Congress shall appropriate the money. Now, we need to also look at history and realize that over the last 40 years, there is a continuing separation of powers underway where the executive branch pulls and pulls more and more authority from the legislative branch. So one of the things that this select committee would allow us to do is, over a 6-month period of time with 5 public hearings, have a national debate about what is the Congress's role, what is the executive branch's role, both under the Constitution and in reality, because just 2 weeks ago, February the 1st, the President's budget request came over. Actually, it was February the 4th. But when it came over, it is full of specific requests for specific programs, which are an earmark. They are earmarks. So one of the first things we need to do with this select committee is define what is an earmark. Because right now, it is not clear as to what is and is not an earmark. For instance, is it an earmark for a member of Congress to request an increase in a specific account at the National Institutes of Health? If it's the National Institutes of Health and you believe that it should be increased and you're a member of the United States Congress and under Article 1, Section 9 you have the authority to appropriate money, that should not be an earmark. But I've got news for you. A lot of things that are right now classified as an earmark should not be an earmark. It should be programmatic in nature. It should be looked at in a different way. So this whole system needs an overhaul. And that select committee can get to that without people claiming turf protection or feeling like you're stepping on their toes. And then they could come back with these recommendations that would have the force of law and truly change this whole process without the legislative branch retreating from its constitutional responsibility or just ceding more and more authority to the executive branch, many times to people at the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, that submits these budget requests, who are neither elected nor educated enough on these issues to actually make these recommendations. That's why it's important for elected representatives to do this in a very responsible way. The Select Committee is exactly that approach, the responsible way to do this. It is comprehensive in nature. As Representative Wolf said, it doesn't just apply to the Appropriations Committee. It applies to authorization committees, tax and trade and tariff bills, the executive branch request, the whole gamut of direction of funding of appropriated dollars. And the whole thing needs to be reformed. And I'll give you an example. The Bridge to Nowhere request is one of the most egregious earmarks that we can point to. And it did not come through the Appropriations Committee. It was, in fact, an authorization bill from the Transportation Committee. That is gas tax dollars that every 5 years the Congress directs to to this project or this priority or that priority. And in fact, that bridge to nowhere was an authorization bill. So you could wipe out all the earmarks on appropriations. And if that's allowed to continue, the most egregious abuse we can point to continues. So you need a comprehensive and systemic approach to this. And that's why we have had consensus developing in our conference on the Republican side for basically a timeout, a moratorium. 6 months, no earmarks, hold up the trains. Let's stop and do this right. But do it responsibly. Don't just willy-nilly say, well, we're going to do this for political purposes or that for political purposes. We're going to grandstand or pander. No, we're going to do this the way that people 50 years from now can look back and study the record and say they put the institution and its congressional prerogatives and responsibilities above the passions of the moment, and they recognize that some people had abused it and that needed to be cleaned up and reformed and changed, but they did not give the people down the street at the executive branch more and more authority and violate the separation of powers under the Constitution of the United States. I think this is an important principle as we go forward on how to truly have a systemic approach to clean this mess up. But it needs change. Anybody who thinks that this system stands the smell test in America is wrong. It needs to change, and we're trying to change it from this place because that's the responsible thing to do. People have abused it. I would argue that the last election in 2006 was lost by our party in large part because of these abuses of earmarks on authorization, tax, trade, energy bills, and appropriations. And we could use an overhaul, statutory framework that the House and the Senate would both have to adhere to. The public is demanding it. And so some self-imposed thing is not going to bring about systemic change. Systemic change is what this institution needs. Change that will still be here 10 years from now, not just for the next election. This shouldn't be political. It should be bipartisan. Just this week, one of the leading Democrats here in the House basically called for the same thing. Said we ought to have a moratorium. We ought to have a timeout. And we need to overhaul this process. His name is Henry Waxman. I talked to him today. I don't want to put words in his mouth. But I was encouraged that one of the leading Democrats said the same thing, basically. We need to have a comprehensive reform of this process known as earmarking. But I believe step one is to define it. What is it? What is not an earmark? And then go forward. Things that are existing by law, that have been around for a long period of time, should not be an earmark. And another thing we need to do is separate the ability of people to have a cottage industry through lobbying for earmarks. I mean, that frankly makes everybody in Washington look bad. It erodes the public trust over a period of time. And there are times where someone advocating for you for a specific cause in this country is necessary. And that's called lobbying. Today, lobbying has a bad name. If I was a lobbyist, I would want these reforms so that my reputation is not tarnished. Just like we appropriators, Wolf, Kingston, Wamp, Kirk, Culbertson, Weldon, Good, others that have helped us with this cause, they don't want our integrity tarnished by the people who abused this prerogative under the Constitution. They're the ones, just like the local law enforcement guy who takes a bribe. All police officers are not like that, and all members of Congress are not going to do what these people did. Thankfully, the people that have violated our trust are either under investigation or they're already gone, or some of them are in jail. But the system needs to be cleaned up so that they cannot do that again. That's what hasn't happened. And frankly, there are some people in this institution who are kind of arrogant about this, saying that it ought to continue and that there's no reason for reform. But that's not true either. So we've got to meet in a rational, logical way, and that's why the select committee approach is the right approach. And I'm very, very proud to stand with Representative Wolf and Kingston and others in support of this approach. And we will have a moratorium on earmarks until we make the needed changes to begin to restore the public trust and uphold the honor and the dignity that should be associated with our fulfilling our responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States. And I thank the gentleman for yielding time.